me preparing for our game of none other than Vampire, the Requiem, one of a complex series of publications associated with Vampire the Masquerade, originally published about 30 years ago. And having been through a wide set of licenses, owners, franchises, I can't follow it. Somebody's going to have to make a chart for me. But as I understand it, we now have two sort of conceptual frameworks. And one is the good old World of Darkness as originally presented and elaborated upon. And then we have this kind of other or alternative verse notion called Chronicles of Darkness. Apparently, Vampire the Requiem is not the Masquerade because it is part of the Chronicles. And that's all I know. With that in mind, I picked this up and I have delved into it. This is by the request of Odin, a member of the Spelens Hus role-playing group. And I have now progressed through talking with 3 of the 4 players about their character. Because looking through the book, I quickly realized that it is dense packed with what I can only call perfervid haiku, and then there are lots and lots and lots of options, and the rules include a lot of exceptions. This is kind of, simultaneously, catnip and tar pit for most people, getting all kind of stuck in all the options and fantasizing left and right, but not actually making up anything. So I came up with kind of a little rubric, and we've been working our way through it. So 3 out of 4, meeting the 4th soon. This is very familiar territory to me. Vampire has deep roots in Shadowrun, obviously, but if we go into the character construction part, it has deep roots in the old Champions. The sort of logic of setting up points into these different categories, and it's obviously very simplified. There's no multiplication or division. For example, the dots were a great thing as introduced back in 30 years ago, and they are still with us today, and more power to the dots. I like them. So what is different? Okay, first of all, for what it's worth, the Requiem tells us that it really is the table group's setting and not the book's setting. So you are to judge what you see in the books and turn up the volume, turn down the volume, throw out clans or whatever you want to kind of shape your particular vampiric table setting. Of course, you can always do that, but ideologically, it's very different from the presentation of the World of Darkness, historically speaking. So that's one of the reasons, apparently, Odin really wanted to do it, because he wanted to play Vampire, but he was always put off at kind of learning the setting, and it was this vast library, and he was kind of like, oh, I like this better. You kind of get inspired by pieces, and you use those pieces. Let's do that. So I get that. I also note that the authors, like so many game designers in the 20-teens, had obviously been doing a little bit of research into games that I know well. So you can see massive influences from games like The Shadow of Yesterday and many other games that were kind of all abuzz at the website Story Games and a few others. Clearly the authors went and kind of opened the lid and looked in there and dug out a few things and stuck them in. So some of them are good ideas. One of the main ones, and I could speculate as to which game had this influence, One of the main ones was saying that the vampire's human side is a relevant portion of play. So you have these touchstone characters, and they are integrated into the humanity track. And you also, they have aspirations, which are goals for the characters, and apparently the aspirations are actually a very big deal for play, and one of them has to concern the human world. The old concept of kind of the inner self and the outer self is preserved and somewhat beefed up by renaming them the Mask and the Dirge, but also tying them to the recovery of willpower. You spend willpower a lot, and you get them back in part by doing specific things regarding your mask and your dirge. So you have an aspiration about your mask, you have at least one, you have a touchstone, a person, at least one, and you have the sort of this notion of putting effort into your mask as well as a resource regaining mechanism. So, it's what your vampire looks like and does out among the humans is more than sort of a throwaway. And in many ways, it kind of takes the old name, the Masquerade, and makes it a little bit more meaty. So, okay. They also gave the option in there of starting with vampires who are not neonates, but instead Ancilla. They recommend starting for that purpose with 10 experience points, which gives you the option of boosting your blood potency a little bit, ramping up a discipline or two, and a few other things like that. It's a little sort of fine-tuning of that kind. I hesitated to add more point-based complexity to character creation, but that turned out to be a really good idea. In my opinion, it's turned out to be way more fun to make up somebody who's been a vampire for half a century rather than somebody who's going, oh my goodness, what is this? What have I become? It's like, all right, balls to that. Let's be vampires. So that's kind of cool. There's something called covenants. Covenants are not clans, which is sort of your vampire species, but your political grouping, your group. It's a way for vampires from different clans to be groups. And they provide some covenants to choose from. And the way we did this actually was we got together and I said, all right, we could go around and around and around forever about which covenant, but we really have to know that before we do anything else. So here's what it is. Each person tell me the covenant that you do not want us to be all in, that you don't want us to be in. And that eliminated like 3 out of the 5 instantly. And then that left a couple that people were interested in. And then, somebody said, well, I want that one. And there we go. So Ordo Dracul is the covenant to which all of our characters belong. As of this moment, with 3 out of 4 characters nicely, if not completed, at least very nicely stabilized, the clans in question are something called Mekhet, which is sort of these ghostly, spying, secretive, vampires, lurkers, basically, and a Nosferatu, which is great because they're, scungy, bulky, fang-mouthed monstrosities, and a Ventru. So I kind of groaned at that one because, all right, yeah, Illuminati, blah, 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 enough. But on the other hand, everything about that character snaps together so nicely that now I can't wait to see him. So can't complain. Don't know what the fourth will be. So who are these Ordo Dracul? What is their covenant about? It is kind of mad scientist vampires who want to turn vampirism into something else. So they're always experimenting on things unholy and things holy and generating projects and delving into abominations and stuff so that they can make vampires into a different kind of being. They want to no longer fear the sunlight, and they no longer want to have all these limitations of different kinds. And it's a little vague in the book, which is probably fine. I mean, I'm sure there's splats all about the specifications, but I'm not that interested. I just kind of think to my mind, all right, the original movie, not the sort of fandom for it, and not any sequels, but the original Reanimator is, in my mind, I consider it an excellent film, a superior film, in fact. And so I kind of, poke that in my head and get rid of the memes and stuff for it, and just kind of say, okay, let's think about something gross like that. So we also, through discussion, people decided that they wanted to set it in among the cities Copenhagen, Gothenburg, and Malmö. So that's the southwestern corner of Sweden and its connection with Denmark, and very vibrant urban area with all sorts of commerce and all sorts of traffic and stuff like that. And in Swedish media anyway, it's rife with corruption and crime, which in Nordic terms is no comment. Well, anyway, so we have that, and they also, interestingly, people were saying, well, what historic period? And I was like, well, I'm just pretty much assuming the modern day, and other people were not. So I thought, well, that's interesting. Well, what do you have in mind? And for some reason, the group collectively very much wanted to set it a decade ago, 2011. Okay, that's interesting. We'll do that. So that's when it's set. The vampires are supposed to have been around for, 20 years of having been a vampire for this level of experience is very recent. So half a century is a little more like it, and a century would be pushing it. So somewhere between 20 and 100 years of being a vampire, which means that we say, okay, where did you get vampirized, and how old were you when that happened? And so that's what you look like now, and or age-wise. And so anyway, that sort of snapped things together a little bit for everyone. I noticed that every single player got really grounded in their concept by simply naming those dates. By implication, the date of the person's birth and the date of the embrace. And then that really, after that, like 10,000 things suddenly just got picked quickly. I decided to go with this. Once we settled the covenant, I asked a given player what clan, and pick fast. This is not, a UN negotiation or something. There's no point. Just pick one you like. Do that. And then after that, it became all about the mask and the dirge. My argument being that once you have a solid mask and dirge, you also have kind of now an identity among people, including things like a job and stuff, or something equivalent. And then you also have a basis on which just go and pick your disciplines and your skills and your attributes, just pile in those points they give you, stick them in there, add values that work for that mask and dirge, and we're done. And I was very specific to say, we are not making an action movie. This is not Shadowrun. You don't have to make, all your characters don't have to know how to shoot, brawl, and drive. Let's get out of there. Although I do cock my eyebrow through the rulebook when I discover that it does in fact tell you, if your character needs to buy lock-picking materials, flashlights, and caltrops. That's in the rules. So, there are some interesting, shall we say, leftover bits of DNA, scattered through some pieces of the book. Although, as I say, it does seem to focus very heavily on this humanity-based conflict with being a vampire, or the various interactions among those things. At least that's very forward in the rules, which is kind of cool. Maybe I wouldn't have minded blowtorching some of the other things that I consider unnecessary to that, but personal preference. System-wise, I am doing some thinking about this. We have 3 important pools of points: willpower, vitae, and humanity, and they interact perhaps too much. At least that's my assessment upon reading. We'll see about it during play. For one thing, it's one of these games where you have to kind of always be in this crouch, watching for specific behaviors. There's like 10 different things that give you a beat. You know, they call it, it's a story beat, and you have to, it's influence of certain games we could mention, where you get 5 beats and that's an experience point. So I'm kind of wondering, I mean, they're all just role-playing things. So if we just look at a session and everybody's done a bunch of role-playing, why don't I just give everybody an experience point? Why do we have to have these little breadcrumbs, along the way? Oh, look, you did that thing. Okay, there's a beat. Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll do that and see if it can be pretty much generalized as we continue to play. I suspect that may be happening at more than one table out there. Okay, so the interactions of those pools is something I'm paying a lot of attention to, and which ones affect the others. There's crisscrosses among them, which I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure if it is or isn't a mess, or whether it's a nice little punchy interplay. We'll find out. So here I go. What other things? Well, I must crank a little. I talked about perfervid haiku, and some of it is almost beyond belief. And there's one particularly cringy thing concerning the pronunciation of the English word solace, which apparently the authors are not aware of, and therefore they made a very clever pun about the absence or presence of your soul, but it wasn't very clever. So I kind of, I'm kind of wincing here and there regarding the English language and its various expressions throughout the rules. But on the other hand, as one of the players told me this morning, that if she had read it at 15, she would have loved every syllable. So I get that too. I will say this. Okay. We are dealing with something that is way out of my tastes, to the point of comfort zone. So I'm out of where I want to be. And there's some pretty interesting, concepts here and there, but in fact, throughout, there's actually some pretty neat statements. There is an awareness of people as people in these rules that I do like very much. They talk about different levels of play. They call it the cannibal totem pole. There's the neonates, new vampires. There's the ancilla, which are what we're playing. And then there are the elders. So each one begins with, the neonate, it begins with, these are the coyote stories. With the ancilla, these are the wolf stories. And the elder, it says, this is the tiger story. And then there's a few paragraphs each after each. When we got together to talk about playing the game, I read the ancilla piece. And one player just said, I'm out. And I had kind of steeled myself. Not only for that player, which I wasn't too surprised about, but so that I wouldn't. Because I will tell you that if there is one set of paragraphs that could easily be in the dictionary under not this person, it is these 3 paragraphs. So let's begin with the ancilla. These are the wolf stories. These are the tales of politics and the dead community. These are the smooth monsters wearing damnation like a stylish coat. Immortal intrigue, thy name is ancillae. The middle management of the damned deal in grim hierarchies, predator and prey posturing, and the complex social stratum of bloodsuckers. The game turns more subtle, but the ancilla is just savvy enough to get ahead. You still have the trappings of humanity, but they are weather-worn. The man might just be a tool to make a cleverer beast. Innocence is barely a memory. Betrayal is like a frightening ladder. You just take it one rung at a time, and you reach heights you never thought possible. In the all-night society, you are one of the movers and shakers. You have some influence over the clueless neonates, and you better use it, because you're just smart enough to understand the barest depths of how the elders are using you. Fuck or be fucked. Welcome to the damnation game. And at that point, a player said, I'm out. And I was like, wish I could go too. But as I said to the group, you know what? We're just going to have to be in high school and freaking like it if we want to play this game. It's just what we have to do. We're going to pretend that what I just said is some shade of functional. Somehow. And again, the game does put that humanity thing front and center with actual NPCs who have points of view, and that is my path to walk, I've decided, in terms of being the game master and a participant at all, because otherwise I couldn't and wouldn't do it.